Thank you for joining us. I'm sure that many of you have had busy days and lots happening today. So yeah, thank you for joining this virtual learning cafe. And yeah, virtual learning cafe is a fancy name for a webinar, but essentially it's an opportunity to get people together and to talk about some really important topics and have different perspectives feed into that topic. If this is your first kind of engagement or interaction with the Youth Endowment Fund, welcome. It's great to have you in this forum with us. For those of you who aren't aware, the Youth Endowment Fund is the What Works Centre for Youth Violence, and we work across 7 sectors, focusing on trying to reduce children's involvement in violence, working towards a future where no child becomes involved in violence. And we're really committed to finding out what works, and you'll be hearing that theme around what works quite a lot throughout this session. And then not just knowing what works, but we want to build a movement to put that into practice. So again, we're going to be hearing about how that can happen, how we can put what works into practice during the course of this virtual learning cafe. We've got 3 clusters of contributors for today's VLC. And we're going to hear from Joe Collin, who is our guidance lead, and he's going to be talking to us about our education practice guidance, which was launched earlier on this year in May. We're then going to hear from the Haringey Peer Action Collective, and we're going to hear from Junior, Alana, and Kendra, and they're going to be sharing with us what they've been working on and bringing it with a really important youth voice into the conversation as well. And our third contributor is Eddie Playfair from the Association of Colleges, who's going to be talking about kind of what he's hearing from the sector and what the barriers and challenges and opportunities are as well in relation to reducing children's involvement in violence. As I mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded, so it does mean that you can kind of listen back and watch back later on for all the juicy and important information that has been shared. And I'd really like to encourage you to use the chat. So just to help us to orientate ourselves with that, please let us know in the chat who you are and where you are. That'd be really helpful to kind of know who we've got in the room and who's going to be kind of listening in and hopefully asking some questions a bit later on. So just give you a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. Great to have you here with us, Catherine. First one to type very quick, impressive with your quick typing skills. Great. So we've got some colleagues from violence reduction networks and units, as well as from some college settings as well coming through so far. Great to see such a regional spread already with the range of different places that people are beaming in from. It's great to have you all with us. Yeah, please keep those coming. And yeah, without further ado, Joe, I'm going to hand over to you. Just as you load your slides up, Joe, yeah, for those of you who haven't met Joe, Joe's our guidance lead. He's extremely knowledgeable in this area of work, and he's going to be talking to us about our recently published education practice guidance. Thanks, Joe.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dennis. You're always a great hype man. I appreciate it. Yeah, lovely to be here this afternoon and really great to see so many colleagues on the call, particularly from the college sector and from violence reduction units. My name's Joe. I'm the guidance lead here at YF. Prior to working at YF, I worked at the EEF, the What Works equivalent for schools, and in that role as well did a fair amount of work in relation to post 16. So yeah, really fantastic to see colleagues on the call today. It's a real pleasure to be presenting this guidance, and this guidance, as Dennis said, that we published in May, is guidance for schools, college and AP leaders on how to protect children from involvement in violence. We're proud of the recommendations, but we're particularly proud with how involved all of those sectors were in the production of those recommendations, and we had a really fantastic group of current school, college and AP leaders supporting the development. However, despite the fact that we think that the recommendations are useful, There's absolutely no point it existing if it just sits on a shelf in YF's office. And so the whole point of it is to get out there and talk to colleagues and talk to people like yourselves to share what the evidence-based guidance suggests and get your thoughts on how we might implement it across the sector. But before I just get into a bit more detail on what is in the guidance, I just want to start with a bit of information on why we need this guidance. Now, I'm aware I might be preaching a bit to the converted, given that you've joined this call, but it's always really useful to share up-to-date statistics and perspectives on why protecting children from violence is particularly salient right now. Now, every year, YEF surveys thousands of 13 to 17-year-olds in our Children Violence and Vulnerability Survey. And this survey, this last one we did last year, published about 12 months ago now, and that was with 7,500 13 to 17-year-olds. 1 in 6 of those 13 to 17-year-olds reported being a victim of violence in the previous 12 months, and 1 in 7 reported committing violence in the same period. Clearly, there's a significant proportion of children that are involved in violence. But even beyond those children, we know that the fear and perspective of violence is also impacting children. So 1 in 5 children had said that they'd missed education because they felt unsafe. And almost 1 in 5 said they felt said that it was harder to concentrate in education due to the violence or the fear of violence. So even beyond just involvement in direct violence, perspectives and the fear of violence is impacting children's education. We also know from a huge survey that we did with teachers last October that violent incidents are happening in education settings. So a survey of 7,500 teachers on the 31st of October 2023 revealed that 2/3 of teachers report that physical assault has happened between children in the last term in their school. 43% of physical assault against a teacher. 15% report that a child has brought a weapon into school, and that's what teachers know about. That, of course, doesn't include children who have a weapon with them that teachers have not found. 12% report that a sexual assault has happened against the child, and that's we know that sexual assault and sexual harassment, particularly from recent reviews that Ofsted have done, is really alarmingly prevalent across schools, colleges and AP in England and Wales. So we know violence happens in education settings, but it's also really important for us to hold 2 things in our mind at once. Yes, violence happens, but also education settings are where children feel most safe. So with the exception of being at home, it's the setting where children feel most safe. 85% of children and incidentally 90% of staff feel safe in school. And feel safe in an education setting. That's compared to 71% that feel safe in shopping centres, 57% on the street, 54% in youth clubs. We also know that nearly 2/3 think that teachers keep them safe. That's compared to 50% that think the police do. So education settings, look, they're part of society. So violence happens there. And children, their education is impacted by violence. However, they are uniquely placed in being overwhelmingly safe spaces for children and young people, which is why they're a real opportunity to protect children from involvement in violence. So in terms of how we produce the guidance, we're a What Works centre, so we really care about evidence and making sure that good, robust evidence is at the core of everything that we do. So underpinning our guidance is the YEF toolkit that you may have seen before, and that's an accessible summary of international research evidence that includes over 2,000 studies. We also included our own evidence from independently evaluated YEF evaluations, the aforementioned surveys that we've done of children and teachers, and some really fantastic critical reflection from current school, college and AP leaders, and a brilliant strategic stakeholder group that includes everyone from the current Chief Inspector of Ofsted, Sir Martin Oliver, the Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza, and some fantastic representatives from unions, including David Hughes from the Association of Colleges, who've really supported us in steering this work. So before I get onto the recommendations, and I'm really building the suspense here, bit before I get to them, it's really important that I just foreground with a couple of points. The first, I note there are a few colleagues here already. I think I noticed Jennifer, Tina, Jake, Catherine, that have specific safeguarding specialty within their role. And it's so critical and so important that we start out by saying, before we even get into the recommendations, the first thing that schools, colleges, and AP must do is recognise that violence and children's involvement in violence is a safeguarding issue. So before considering any of our recommendations, it's so critical that that leaders in those settings ensure that schools, colleges, and AP are fulfilling their safeguarding roles effectively. You won't need me to tell you that, particularly those safeguarding experts on the call. But that's critical and really important. The 5 recommendations I'm now going to talk about, you'll notice that they don't reinvent the wheel, and that's on purpose. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to just say, here are 5 new things that you should do tomorrow, whilst recognising that you probably don't have the time, resource, funding to do so. But also, we recognise that there's already lots of really fantastic practice that's happening in schools, colleges, and AP right across the country. So some of what these what some of these recommendations are about implementing them more consistently and more widely. So without further ado, the 5 recommendations, and I should say these are all available online and are freely accessible. I'll just share them in the chat, and I'm going to talk through each of them in turn. So recommendation 1 is to keep children in education. I can almost hear the sighs of, well, yeah, obviously. But it's really important for us to reiterate that, as I've already said, education is where children feel safe, but there's good evidence that schools, colleges, and AP play a protective role in protecting children and young people from involvement in violence. Of course, since COVID, this is not only us, right across the sector, and I know in the college sector in particular, actually, there's been a real marked rise in absence post-COVID. This is a real concern, and in terms of where children are and where children and young people are not transitioning back into education as they were pre-COVID. And there are some evidence-informed strategies that can play a role in reducing that. So whether that is breakfast clubs or teachers meeting with the parents of absent young people to discuss what the barriers to attendance might be, we suggest some evidence-informed strategies to improve that. We also talk about the challenge of suspension and exclusion. And we know this is a really challenging area, and we know that, you know, no head teacher goes into education to suspend or exclude children, and head teachers have to quite carefully balance the needs of individual children with the wider school community. But we also know that being suspended and excluded from school is associated with later involvement in crime and offending. And so we suggest that education settings do 2 things. First, they look to reduce the need for exclusion and suspension in the first place by creating inclusive school environments and working with children on their behaviour. And secondly, and this is really critical, ensuring that those children who are suspended or even excluded from schools receive the support that they need. I think this is an issue that is more prevalent at the pre-16 level, but even at post-16, since COVID, exclusions and suspension are very much on the rise. And so just making sure that those children that are suspended from school, you know, you're still staying in touch with them. You're designated assigning a designated pastoral professional to check in with them, even if it's just a phone call each day, every other day, arranging regular review meetings, assigning them a mentor to support them can be really impactful and can really protect that child from involvement in violence and offending. The second recommendation is at the core of so much of what we say at YEF, and that is the importance of meaningful relationships with adults that care. Now, of course, right across colleges and education settings, you'd hope that this is happening all the time, and that every child and young person is receiving those relationships from the adults in settings. Nonetheless, what we're recommending here is that children and young people that are particularly vulnerable, so perhaps it's young people who, you know, are struggling to get on with their peers, or it's young people who you suspect might have been involved in or might be at risk of becoming involved in violence or offending, or it's young people who are persistently absent or severely absent from the setting. Providing them with one-to-one mentoring with a trusted adult for up to and preferably over 2 terms can be really impactful. Sports is also another way in which you can do this, and there's some really interesting case studies in the guidance where schools and colleges have reached out to local rugby clubs or local sports organisations and just said, look, what have you got on offer? Can you support our young people? And they'll come and they'll do a weekly session, and via that you can make the most of some of those mentoring and role modelling opportunities. Recommendation 3 is all about children's social and emotional skills. You'll notice here and throughout and using the word child, the reason for that is, we recognise that 16 to 18-year-olds would like to be called young people, of course, but we often have the opposite challenge where young children, even 16-year-olds are adultified too much. So if it means we add in a bit of bias by just calling them children all the time and just reminding people, these are under 18s, then that's the bias that we prefer to take. But this recommendation is all about equipping those young people with the social and emotional skills to better regulate their emotions and avoid involvement in violence and offending. It really stems from the fact that 7 out of 10 of those children who admitted to perpetrating violence in that survey that I mentioned at the start said that they did so because they were provoked. 7 in 10. So clearly for those 7 in 10 children, 70%, there is a challenge here around regulating their emotions and not reacting when something happens, and thinking really carefully about how we might be able to develop that within education settings. And there are a wide range of things that we can do, such as explicitly teaching social and emotional skills, and that's certainly a core part of both the primary and secondary curriculum. But even at a post-16 level, really thinking about what personal development do young people receive, and then some specific things around specific PSHE and relationship and sex education that children could do. Relationship violence reduction is a really key one, and there's some fantastic evidence actually that delivering relationship violence reduction sessions to young people that talks to them about what healthy relationships look like, and what are the sort of warning signs and red flags to look out for in a relationship can reduce the prevalence of gender-based violence and relationship violence. There's lots of implementation guidance in the guidance report on how to do that effectively. But we're heartened by the fact that the government have come in and pledged to halve violence against women and girls over the next 10 years, and so we're really hopeful that this will start to become more prominent in policy, but also practice discussions. Similarly, another way of developing social and emotional skills for children and young people that really need it and are particularly in need is psychological therapies. We ummed and ahed about whether to include this in education guidance because, this is not the primary role of education settings to provide this. However, we were really heartened by the fact that lots of colleges and schools are already partnering with local organisations, recognising the gap that statutory services are perhaps not able to fill at the moment, stepping in, partnering with local charities, even employing their own mental health specialists and therapists to deliver mental health support and therapy to young people. And again, there's a good evidence that this is a really good bet for supporting children who are particularly at risk. The fourth recommendation, I imagine this is really familiar to particularly the colleagues on the call from violence reduction units and networks. And this is to really target your efforts when looking to reduce children and young people's involvement in violence. Target your efforts at the places and times where violence tends to occur. Between 4 and 6 p.m. is when violence is most prevalent amongst young people. It makes sense, right? They've just finished college, they've just finished school, they're tending to congregate together. So if you are delivering a sports program or a sports club, right, could you do it at that time? Similarly, ask young people where do they feel safe? Where do they feel safe in college? Where do they feel safe in the local community? And then target your efforts at those areas. So there's a really interesting case study from Oldham College in the guidance, who noticed that trouble was tending to happen in the tram stop outside the college. And they talked to young people, and that had come through. And so they partnered with local police and a local mentoring organisation and increased police visibility between the hours of 4 and 6 around that tram stop, but also provided mentors and youth workers around the tram stop to talk to people and to develop some relationships, really targeting efforts at the places where violence might occur. The final recommendation is a bit more of a controversial one and a bit more of a challenging one for us to articulate. And this is that I've spoken about 4 things that we think colleges and schools should do. Here's something that colleges and schools should perhaps think about not doing, particularly recognising that resource is often tight, and you can probably better spend that resource on more evidence-based strategies. So we recommend cautiously considering those strategies that are unproven. So things like knife education programs, we're not saying they don't work, we just don't have any evidence to say that they do. So this is when an organisation will come in and speak to young people about the dangers of carrying a knife and what that can lead to. We don't know if that works. We do know that half of secondary teachers in the country report that those activities are happening in their schools. We have a slight concern that it might lead to children just being worried. And if a child is worried that everyone locally is carrying a knife, that might make them more likely to carry a knife. But we don't know. We don't know if that's the case. So we'd ask people to really cautiously consider whether that is the best evidence-based thing they can do. The same is true for trauma-informed practice training and policing in corridors and classrooms. We're not saying those things don't work. We're just saying they don't have a strong evidence base yet for their use. So you might want to deliver other things. Something that we are saying shouldn't be delivered and colleges and schools should not do is prison awareness programs. And that is, programs like Scared Straight in the US, where you're taking a young person into a prison and saying, you're going to end up here if you keep on going down the route that you're going down. There's actually evidence to suggest that that is a harmful approach. And so we'd certainly recommend that that one is not something that's pursued. So those are the 5 recommendations. Often when we talk to current practitioners about this, they'll say, fantastic, great. Where on earth am I going to find a mentor? Where on earth am I going to find a therapist, or the funding, or the time, or the training to do several of those recommendations? And we totally agree. And so that's why we are going to be supplementing this guidance with a second guidance report that we'll be publishing in April, which is systems level guidance. So this will be not targeted at head teachers and leaders in college, AP and schools. And this will be targeted at policymakers, at the government, and basically say, look, if we want to make the practice guidance possible, what needs to change in the system and what support do practitioners need to do that? I'll stop sharing now and open up for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You did a great job to pack so much into a short amount of time. If you have got a question, please raise your hand, and then we'll do our very best to look across the multiple screens to find you and bring you into the conversation. Joe, if I may start off with a question to give some people a bit of thinking time. You mentioned there about that intentional language around children. And what if I was sat here thinking, well, this is all relevant for schools and for children in schools, but perhaps not for college sectors? What would your answer be to that?
Yes, it's a really good point, and I think I'd say 2 things. I think the first is a bit of a repetition on we'd always prefer for children to be infantilized rather than adultified, right? And because I think the latter happens much more often, and so yeah, that's certainly our primary concern, and that's why we use that language. The second is that, and actually even if we move beyond and look at the bracket, if we look at 18 to 24-year-olds, I was doing some reading this week on the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, recently surveyed 3,000 adults on their attitudes towards rape myths and young people's perceptions of gender-based violence. And 18 to 24-year-olds held more of those myths than over 65s. right? That I think sometimes there's a bit of a misnomer that young people, have a bit more of an understanding on what might be appropriate behaviour, or what might be, the cause of gender-based violence or violence more generally. And it's really important that we recognise that, young people need this support, very much so. And even as they get older, even past 18, there's pretty clear evidence that they really need some of the support that we've suggested in these recommendations.
You very much for that. And if you aren't already subscribed to the YF newsletter, that's a great place to go to and make sure you're getting regular updates on all the reports that Joe and his colleagues work on and share with both the education sector as well as a wide range of other sectors as well. And there will be another opportunity for questions at the end of everyone's contributions. I can't see any raised hands at the moment. I'm going to move forward, and it's with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce the Haringey Peer Action Collective. It's often that I'm in rooms where we're talking about education without young people present. So it's really, really great to have not just one, not just two, but three young people able to share like their voice and the experience from the research that they've been carrying out. So Junior, Alana, and Kendra, thank you for being with us, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having us. Thank you, Joe, for everything you said. It was actually really interesting to hear like all your research and insight. But yeah, so I'll get started. So we come from the Peer Action Collective. So the Peer Action Collective is a UK-based initiative which empowers young people to lead efforts in making their community more like safer and more like equitable. So we are the London delivery partner. We're based in North London, Haringey. Our team is specifically looking at schools and colleges and how they can reduce youth violence within their spaces. And to do this, we conducted research into young people's involvement in youth violence, and we did this with the support of the McPin Foundation and the Peace Alliance. So today, we'd like to share what we've achieved so far. And so basically, we've just wrapped up our first phase of research, where we spoke to over 75 young people about how schools and colleges can take preventative approaches to protect them from becoming involved in youth violence. So our research highlighted important insights from young people. So these are how colleges need to support young people before, during, and after an exclusion, and how colleges can support young people in a way that protects them from being involved in violence. So I'd like to hand over to Junior.
Hi, thank you, Alana, for just facilitating and laying the foundation on who we are at the Peer Action Collective. So for our research, we conducted one-on-one interviews, focus groups, and workshops with over 75 participants who were all locals from our area and all young people who had the chance to express their feelings about how they felt before, during, and after the exclusion. And personally, through like conducting the research, I was able to I think appreciate research more for what it is, and appreciate the wealth that's in research and how powerful it can be as a young person, inviting young people to this space and just working together to try find solutions. So we also tried to figure out what would be an effective way for colleges to deal to install preventative measures and protect them against becoming involved in violence. So yeah. So some of the key findings that we found are highlighted here. So the first one just touches on how exclusions may push young people towards violence more, and due to how unsettled they feel with school and how resentful they are to the school system and how marginalized they felt or discriminated against they felt through school, as well as how ignorant sometimes school can be towards the context of behavior, not considering the domestic life and physical health and mental health and well-being and all these things which should be really prioritized for young growing individuals which aren't, as well as more holistic support which needs to be implemented into schools and especially colleges, and being able to teach people, these young people, how to manage their emotions effectively and how to understand their own mental health, and taking a more active approach to youth violence and being able to have those grassroots early interventions to help solve some issues, and again a more holistic and personalized approach to supporting students. Yeah, so here on my, I'm pretty sure that's my right, but on my right we have a better exclusion roadmap, which basically details the views expressed by the young people we have who have participated in our research, and Kandra's going to walk through the different steps on this roadmap and how it would help be preventative from getting young people involved in violence.
So based on our findings from our PAC research with our 75 young participants, we created this journey map for exclusions. And before exclusions, young people say that they need to take an active approach to supporting those at risk of and already involved in violence. And they also say that colleges should focus on prevention of exclusions by understanding the root causes of behaviour and providing appropriate support. During exclusion, young people say that young people receive personalised support from trusted adults during their exclusion. They also state that colleges ensure that there is effective communication before, during and after. And after exclusions, young people say that colleges create meaningful opportunities for reflection. They say that colleges create personalized reintegration support plans with reasonable adjustments to help the young person to thrive.
Okay, so obviously that was a brief overview of what we've done so far with our project, and we were able to share what the ideal youth or young person would feel like would need to happen, like during exclusion, before, during, and after. But it doesn't really end there. We'd like to say, if you guys would like to keep in contact, you can join our mailing list and receive updates on our project as we're moving into phase 2 by scanning the QR code. Or if you'd like to work with us or help us with our journey, you can email the email below. And if you have any young people who want to be involved in our project or maybe help us with our social action and pushing our research out there, they could please contact us again at the email below. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you. And I again want to underline the importance of having both your voices, but you three representing those 75 young people that were able to share. I can see some virtual applause ringing out across the room. I wanted to ask whether there are any surprises. So you've asked lots of questions to lots of young people. Was there anything that came out that was a surprise to you?
I don't. We can both answer, but personally, I'd say there.
Alana, we can't hear you. You are off mute, so maybe just try and mute yourself and come off again and see if it works.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
yes,
I can hear you, Alana.
Okay. I'd say there wasn't anything that was too surprising, because obviously being a student myself and having going through school, and seeing other people be a student and experiencing these kind of things myself, I did feel all their emotions and all their thoughts as well. So I'd say there was nothing extremely surprising, but it was really good to hear other perspectives and to hear from where they were coming from and all their other things that played a factor in like their life and things like that.
Great, thanks for sharing. Yeah, there's a opportunity for questions. So if you have got a question, please raise your hand, and then.
You want me to come in, Dennis? Good question. I thought that was such valuable research that you've undertaken. It's a very powerful.
I think it's my mic actually that's having issues.
Yeah, I think
Joe,
it
if you
is.
can go ahead, that would be great.
You go first, Gail.
Shall I carry on? Yeah. So the question I had got was, I don't know if you know, but some multi-academy trusts have, and one local authority as well, Southwark, have introduced zero exclusion policies. So basically, they're not going to exclude any young people. And I wondered if you'd had any perspectives on that, or if you've got a perspective yourself on whether that's a good idea, or do you think there should always be exclusions, even if a very small number?
Well, for this question, a bit of context. I went to a secondary school which was very big on like exclusion and very militant and very policing, but the sixth one I go to now actually has like a no exclusion policy. So I think that to be able to speak on this would be quite maybe insightful in a way. But I think that it all kind of depends on catering contextually to the students in your school and catering to their needs, because the school I go to now is in quite a different area. Even though it's quite close, it's quite a different area, and obviously the students may have different needs. And if you look at it more holistically, certain things work for certain individuals, whereas other things don't. So I think that a zero exclusion policy may be warranted in some areas, but there should still be sanctions, well, the appropriate sanctions for inappropriate behavior. But I do think that the way exclusions are handled and the way they kind of incriminate students should be kind of like removed completely. I think exclusion should be more of a should like create more of a relationship and less, I think, disparity between teachers and students, because during our research we did see how many students felt like they were being treated quite unfairly and discriminated against. So I think creating a better school culture, because I do think there is quite a strong school culture in the school I go to now. So just I think really starting early and having that early intervention and growing that school culture will really, I think, make such a cohesive environment and community. Thank you.
Maybe you go next, Joe. I think Dennis's mic's not working.
Yeah, we can't quite hear you, Dennis. We can ask some questions then hand over to the next presentation if that's useful. But yeah, I thought that was fantastic, and really I love the roadmap as well, and really getting a sense of the different stages and the support that young people should be receiving at those different stages. I was really interested in the support element once children are excluded. How prevalent is that? So how often were young people reporting receiving some of that support after being excluded? Is it the norm, or actually does it happen in some cases and it's really positive and it should happen more often?
Okay, I'll answer this. Oh,
okay.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. So when
Yes,
when we were doing the interviews and the focus groups, a lot of people were saying they weren't receiving any support, and they were saying like schools kind of left them to be, or were kind of toxic afterwards. Like, so they had kind of a different view of the students after they came back from exclusion, and that kind of provoked them more and made things like worse. Like, and it kind of became a cycle because they weren't really receiving any support before, during, and after the exclusion. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does, and doesn't surprise me. It's something we're worried about, like what support are children and young people receiving after being suspended or excluded from school. And yeah, really, really fantastic you've been able to highlight that directly from the voices of young people. So thank you.
Thank you. And when tech fails, if in doubt, rejoin on your phone. So that's what I've done. So I'm back with you all. Thanks, Gail and Joe, for stepping in. Yeah, thank you so much. Jennifer, you've got a question. Please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, thank you. And thank you very much to the young people for your sharing that fantastic research with us. I just wondered if you could tell me what the next phase of your research looks like and how we could collaborate with you.
Okay, I'll answer this one as well. So right now we're focusing on social action. So essentially that's, so we've collected all our research and we're trying to kind of push out what we've researched to other young people and trying to get this information out there. So right now we are making a interactive film where we're trying to like go through the life of someone who is at risk of being excluded and giving people the choice to pick what they could do and seeing where the outcomes are. So that's what we're doing right now. But also we're starting phase 2, and that's where we kind of want to focus on more on mental health and how that's connected to youth violence, because we found that that was something that came up again and again and again when we were speaking to a lot of young people. So it was something that we all felt quite passionate about and felt like that was something we would like to look more deeply into. So yeah, and to collaborate with us, I'd say to email, sorry, the email that was that, I don't know if Hannah can put it in the chat, because she'd be a great person to get in contact with. But yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you, Alana. And yeah, great to hear that there's an appetite for collaboration across the attendees here. We have the email for Hannah. Interesting sharing this with the young people that you work. We're going to hand over to our final contributor. So that's Eddie Playfair from the Association of Colleges. It's really important that we have different perspectives feeding into this discussion, as there's never, a simple one-size-fits-all approach. And Eddie is Senior Policy Manager at the Association of Colleges. So Eddie, I'm going to hand over to you for you to tell us what you've been hearing from the sector.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this session. And I'm going to try and share some slides. And I mean, it is a different perspective, but I think it dovetails very nicely with what everyone else has said. Joe's presentation, and also the Haringey Collective presentation. So I'm hoping that this will come up shortly as a big slide, taking up your whole screen. Yes. Can someone? Yeah, I'm getting the thumbs up. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, so I'm Eddie Playfair from the Association of Colleges. We represent colleges in England. We're the membership organisation for colleges. And in a previous life, I worked in colleges for many years, and I was a college principal. And in all my colleges, all the colleges I worked in, we had fairly major challenges in terms of disadvantage, inequality, but also youth violence was a regular issue. So it's something that I've got kind of lived experience of. So the first thing I want to say is that the broadly the college of the culture of colleges is inclusive. We're not in the business of selecting students and telling students they don't meet our entry requirements. There are very few barriers to enrollment. Most colleges are very comprehensive and inclusive, and that is a difference with the school sector, where there's a whole kind of a plethora of different kinds of schools with different kinds of entry requirements. So of course there are entry requirements to courses, but the basic culture for a college is that we plan our provision to meet the needs of all young people. And certainly colleges don't want to either criminalize young people or exclude them, because we understand that exclusion is simply about moving the problem onto the streets or elsewhere. And creating bigger problems. So that's the basic starting point. In fact, there isn't really a system of exclusion from colleges. Colleges don't really exclude. Students can be withdrawn. Students can withdraw themselves, and they can be withdrawn for various reasons, mainly, you know, to do with not being on track to pass their course. And obviously, students can be in breach of the code of conduct in a major way, and not respond to the kind of support that's offered. But essentially, the culture is inclusive rather than exclusive. And of course, because we deal with older students, students 16 and above, and I completely take the point about not adultifying 16 and 17-year-olds, many of our students are quite aware of the link between criminal activity and violence already, but other students are not. So there's a range of different kind of levels of awareness of the risks and the vulnerabilities. The other thing that strikes me, I mean, this is really something that, as I say, I've lived for many decades, is that understanding that, you know, when there's an incident, when there's a violent incident, when a student is engaged in violence, there are perpetrators and there are victims. And in many cases, particularly with criminal exploitation, students are both perpetrators and victims. And all of those need support. They need support in both those capacities. And it's you know, that distinction between perpetrator and victim can sometimes be very, very grey. And then I come to the point about being children. It doesn't come naturally to us in the college sector to talk about our students being children, which of course they legally are up till 18. Our talk, it very much is about, yeah, our students as adults, as young adults, as you know, agents of their own lives, and you know, as citizens. But I think we also need to recognise that there is, I mean, it's a bit of an artificial threshold at 18, but it still is a legal threshold, and it's really important not to be making assumptions about young people who are technically children. And I think being a child is compatible with learning adult behaviours. I don't think there's any contradiction between being a child and learning adult behaviours, because you don't suddenly, you know, things don't suddenly change at the age of 18. Then what I've seen in all my colleges really is that the danger of taking violence for granted, of assuming that because your context and your environment includes the threat of violence or actual violence around you, or you know, weapon carrying, that this is normal and that this is okay, and it's not, you know, it's not something that needs to be challenged and fought. And there's, of course, there's a glamorization, and we know that social media and culture can sometimes glamorize violence, as well as it being acceptable. All of these things put pressure on college systems, college youth support. I think Joe and others have talked about the pressures other services, whether it's mental health services, youth support, youth services, which have been decimated over the years, counselling services, mental, you know, CAMS. All these services are under great pressure, and often, as the first point of support, colleges are finding that they're the ones who are kind of trying to plug the gap. I mean, I recognise the story, for example, about police cuts, where we had, you know, from in the early days of my of being a principal in Newham, we had support officers, you know, on a regular basis at our home time. So you had lots of friendly, sort of, you know, uniformed police officers who knew the students well, who were kind of around on the streets, on the pavements at home time, you know, every day. And they built a relationship with the students, they built a relationship with us, and there was a real sense that, you know, we were working together, we were supporting each other in terms of behaviors and you know, helping young people to get home safely after college. That all went. I mean, that just disappeared literally from one year to the next, and we could see a rise in problems and challenges as soon as that happened. And you know, that was just clearly the same with youth services. Youth services were cut, and we saw the impact very quickly on the problems in the street. So moving on to perhaps a bit more detail around what colleges do. The first thing to say is colleges are key locations. We're both a place where there are lots of young people, and so clearly that's a place where any challenges, any problems will be visible. So that's a place where we can understand the challenges, but we're also a place we are places where we can solve some of the problems. We can, because of our critical mass, because of our size, we can organize youth activities for our own students, but also for young people in the area. And work on solutions, develop solutions, host projects and responses. So we're both at the kind of sharp end, but also at the solution end. At the problem end and also at the solution end. I've talked a bit about college cultures. A lot of this is about, and I think the young people from Haringey were talking about this. The culture, what is the culture of the college? That makes a really big difference. If young people walk into college at 16 and recognize this is a place where they'll be listened to, where they'll be respected, where they'll be included, where there's a very clear, uncompromising commitment to non-violence, anti-racism, anti-sexism, and so on. That helps a lot. It doesn't stop incidents, but it makes a big difference. The culture of the institution. How does it feel to be there, to be a member of that institution? Are you valued? Are you listened to? And then there are specific initiatives. In my college, we had a program we call Life Not Knife. It certainly wasn't knife education, as Joe put it earlier, but it was really having I think it was a week or two when we focused on the strategies that you could adopt to deal with the real threat that was that was out there, and to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem yourself as a young person, and to build a kind of culture among our students. And we had some terrible incidents. I mean, I lost a number of students. We lost a number of students to both knife and gun crime, and we had to do a lot of work with the students in the college about how do we respond to real incidents where we've lost a friend or a student. But having that tradition of doing activities like Life Not Knife meant we already had a kind of infrastructure, emotional and cultural infrastructure of being able to respond. Didn't make it any easier. When you lose a student, it's a terrible thing, but we had systems that helped us to be resilient. I also want to give a shout out to a project which actually sounds very similar to what we've heard from Haringey, which is Leaders Unlocked student commissions, which are fantastic initiatives with college students, organizing college students who have lived experience of particular challenges, and they then do research with their peers and develop a kind of agenda for change, which they then present to policymakers, their own college, but also to policymakers like local councils and police and so on. And they've had a series of these, and you can see them all you can see their findings on their website, on the Leaders Unlocked website. Knife crime was actually the first one, but there was a big one on racism, a big one on violence against women, and the program rolls on. And this is fantastic because, amongst other things, it builds a kind of it builds the young people's capacity to be advocates and leaders and researchers, as we've heard today, and that's a fantastic investment in the future, not just in the college but beyond when they leave college. And colleges work with the VRUs, they work with community safety partnerships. They should be seen as strategic partners. Sometimes the problem is colleges are just seen as kind of big schools. And as I've said, they need to be seen as more than just a big school, because they have a wider catchment, and they have a bigger stake, if you like, in solving the problems. And we have our own support networks between colleges to share good practice, and we have a regional setup where we can support colleges. Different colleges are at different places in the journey, obviously. I wanted to say, if there's time, just a few quick words about the violent disorder this summer. I'm not sure if it's off message a little bit, but just to give you an example of how AOC was able to support colleges. Obviously, we were all deeply shocked, and there was, and a lot of damage was done to the fabric of our communities through the rioting in August. And so we wanted to provide support for colleges, and also to maybe try and learn some lessons, because we're very aware that although you know, the riots are over. I say over, perhaps inverted commas, but they're not happening anymore. But the conditions and the contexts which gave rise to them are still there, and so we need to understand that, and we need to recommit in our colleges to our values, and promote the kind of narratives around diversity, around community, around migration, and so on, which can challenge the you know those young people who are tempted and who did participate in this disorder, for many different reasons. In some cases, you know, you're talking about excitement and excitement and nothing else to do kind of thing. But in some cases, it was clearly a far right kind of racist motivation as well. And we need to invest in our communities, and that's not just colleges. That's the government having to invest in all that kind of fabric community infrastructure. And I suppose this, in a sense, it does connect with what we've been talking about today, because we need that investment in order to build resilience to violence. It's not going to stop all violence, but it will help, and it's urgent. You know, I do think it's urgent. So here are some of the things we did. I'm not going to go through the details. I've talked already about cultures of respect, inclusion, non-violence, and making sure that we understand what's going on in our local patch, but also nationally. I think quite a lot of colleges were well aware of the risks of this kind of explosion of disorder that happened. It feels like in many of our communities, it's not far below the surface, whether it's around criminality, the drug trade, gang rivalries, or whether it's around far right racist activity, whatever it is. I think most colleges will be well aware of the kind of undercurrents and tendencies that are in their community, and they want to work closely with VRUs, police, youth workers, etc. So I think we're coming to the end now. So other things we're doing, obviously, our job is to provide support to colleges. We don't tell colleges what to do. We provide some support, resources, guidance. It's been great for us to have YEF there, because we're able to point to your report, which has been brilliant. Dennis has been fantastic and has started coming to some of our conferences and speaking, and he's going to be on the main platform at our national conference in November. That's very exciting, talking about youth safety and anti-violence strategies. Colleges want to be involved in the response. They want to be developing young people. They want to be building community. They are running lots of youth social action projects, positive youth social action projects. They are engaged in anti-racist education projects. They're very, very engaged in mental health support, including peer support. And the great hook for this for government, although we know that the budget is probably not going to give us the resources that we really need in October, later this month rather, we do see that the opportunity mission and the Safer Students mission, the Safer Streets missions, if they're interpreted broadly, are an opportunity to say, okay, colleges can be part of that, but we do need the resource to make it happen. We have this Safer Students conference, which we've just had, which Dennis spoke at, and we also are very committed to listening to student representatives and students. We have a student engagement charter, which where colleges are expected to involve and engage their students in decision making, in shaping their colleges, shaping their communities, and we also have some fantastic staff in colleges that lead on student support, student development, student voice, and equality and diversity and inclusion. And we have all sorts of networks that those people can work on. So there's a lot of ways in which we're trying to respond, and we work with different government departments, including the Home Office, Ministry of Justice, DCMS, Children's Commissioner was mentioned earlier, and of course our key department is the DFE, which is our main funder. So I think that's probably, yes, that's probably it from me. Very, very happy to take questions if there's time, and just thank you again for thinking of us and for involving us in this dialogue, which is so important and so urgent, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie. And yeah, if you do have a question for Eddie, please raise your hand, and I'll bring you into the conversation. Eddie, I really like what you shared there around being both at the sharp end and at the solutions. And yeah, from the colleagues that I've been speaking to across the sector, there's often pockets of energy and pockets of efforts happening in different places. But I think the opportunity to work with yourselves to kind of come together, I think, and collaborate is really, really important. So yeah, if you're a college setting on this call and you're not already engaged with the Association of Colleges, yeah, I'd definitely point you in that direction to get a bit more connected in with some of the work that's happening. Any questions for Eddie before we move on? Joe.
Thanks, Eddie. I thought that was fascinating. What do you think are the key sort of challenges that are facing the college sector in particular in better supporting some of the children that you'd have taught and some of the children that YF are really interested in better supporting?
I think there's three main things, and number one, as always, is resources. Just a general lack of resources. I have to say that because it's what our members are telling us all the time, and it really is true. But the other two, one is data, information exchange, and one is partnership working, multi-agency working. So on the information piece, a lot of our members will say that they don't get full enough, timely enough, accurate enough information from the places where students come from, i.e. schools. And that's not an anti-schools message, but there has been, and there is still in some areas, a culture that says we don't pass on information that we think is going to information that might somehow damage our students' chances when they go to college. It's that kind of fresh slate approach that says they're having a fresh start. We don't need to burden them with all this information about their exclusions or their behavior pre-16. And that is a misunderstanding of what I was saying earlier, which is the college culture. We want to know about a student's history because it will help us to support them, to include them, and to keep them. And the number of cases I've had personally, but also I've heard of in colleges where the college says, if only we'd known X, which was knowable from the previous school, we could have prevented Y. We could have prevented something bad happening, or we could have been prepared for it. So I think there's a misunderstanding in some places around why it's important to share information fully. And the example I use is students with EHCPs, with education healthcare plans, where basically you share everything, and you share it really early, and you have a dialogue, with the parents and the student and everybody around the table, and you make sure there's a package, there's a plan to support that student. Well, in a sense, everyone deserves that. Everyone, including students who've had a difficult time at school or been excluded or moved around. The other classic one you hear about is the two students who were both excluded or who had some terrible conflict in a school, some beef in a school, which led to violence. They then had managed moves and went to two different schools in the area, and everything settled down, and they then both come to college. And they end up in the same class at college, and it all kicks off again. And you think, well, again, if only we'd known the history, we could have done something about it. We could have planned for it. We could have avoided it. So that's number one. The number two is the one about partnership working, and this partly speaks to the issue around resources, and everyone's overstretched. CAMS is overstretched, mental health services overstretched, police overstretched, social work teams everyone overstretched. And the problem is, college is where you're at. College is where the student is. If something kicks off, if something happens, often college is the first stop, and it really puts a strain on the college if they're expected to do everything. They do their best, they really do, but the system of multi-agency working is under real pressure. And again, there's lots of cases of if only we'd met before, if only we'd shared that information before, if only we'd had a chance to bring everyone around the table and talk, things could have been avoided. So yeah, so that's the other priority. And as I say, these are things that we're being told day by day by members.
Great, thank you. We've got another question from Hannah.
Hi, Eddie. Thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting. My question is, why and how should young people be involved in the solution for how colleges should approach reducing violence?
Well, I love the Leaders Unlocked model, which, as I say, very similar to the Haringey experience, because, and it does mean that each generation of students, I mean, colleges don't have students for very long, 2, 3 years, very seldom 4 years. So, students are flowing through the college quite fast, but it does mean reinventing, having that conversation each time. What do you feel are the risks? What makes you feel unsafe? What can we do? What can we do as a community? What do you want? And not take anything for granted. It does mean reinventing, rediscovering that, rehabbing that conversation. Rehab? Can you rehab something? Rehaving that conversation every year afresh with a new group of students. But the great thing about doing that is you're building their capacity to be to take charge, to be to represent themselves and to come up with solutions, and they then carry that through with them to their future lives. So I don't think there's any substitute for the hard work of actually building their capacity. And we saw it. What was lovely, and I'm thinking of my time in Newham in particular, but what was lovely is that some schools are doing it really well. And when those students come to us at 16, you think, wow, they are having that, they're there talking about their safety, they're talking about their mental health, they're talking about what needs to happen, they're making demands of the college. They're saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to think about this. And that was great. Other students from other schools were coming with no experience of that, and we had to kind of train them up to do that. So it's a bit variable, in terms of where they're coming from, but it's wonderful when it goes well. And I always loved it when students would kind of march up to, or come to a meeting, or march up to my office and say, this is not acceptable, this needs to be done, we need to do something about that. And the really sad times are when, as I say, you lose a student, a student gets killed, and the whole community is saying, what could we have done, what could we do, what do we do now, and they see the grief, you have the grief, you see the grief, you see the family's grief, you see the friends' grief, you see the whole community is in grief, is in shock. And you're thinking, well, how can we accept this? And I think there's a little bit of that with this summer's riots. It's like, how can we live in a society where this kind of thing happens? What have we done? Where have we gone wrong? What's going on? And students want to be part of the solution. I don't think that's an answer to your question, Hannah, but that's I think there's something about rebuilding it, having the strong values, the core values of your institution, absolutely rock solid and non-negotiable, as I said, all the time, but making sure you reinvent them and live them and share them and put them into practice. Each new year, each new day, really.
Thank you, Eddie. Yeah, I love that idea of kind of the need to repeat that process. And I think for long-standing colleagues who have maybe worked in an institution for a long time, it may be easy to forget that the nature of the cohorts is continually cycling through. Yet we did that a few years ago, but that's for a totally different cohort, and that's not there within their knowledge and within their experience. So yeah, that's definitely something that I'll be taking away from this conversation, as well as your point around not taking violence for granted. Yeah, some really pertinent points that you shared from your experience and from the sector. Thank you.
And isn't it difficult, Dennis, in the world we live in today, to be saying to students, don't take violence for granted, don't normalize violence, when all we hear on the news is the adults? What are the adults up to? And that makes it harder, doesn't it? Sorry.
No, definitely. I think there's a risk as there's greater publicity around the issue, it almost normalizes that it's a common issue and therefore it's something that's acceptable. But yeah, really great points there. Thank you. And a huge thank you to all of our contributors, to Junior, Alana, Kendra, to Joe, and to you, Eddie. Yeah, thank you for those of you who have tuned in at the end of the day to kind of listen and be part of this conversation. We do have regular virtual learning cafes, both for education and for a range of other sectors. So if you are interested in that, sign up to our YF newsletter, as I mentioned earlier on. And a classic plea for us as organisers, if you could fill in the feedback form that you'll be sent at the end after your attendance, that would be really fantastic. But also the video will be available as a recording, so if you're able to share that with colleagues as well and distribute the information that's been shared, that would be fantastic. Thanks again for joining us, and for now we'll see you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.